It's a warm summer evening in New Brighton. Orange light bleeds over Merseyside. The tower blocks cast long shadows, but the boy doesn't board. He's not just running, he's being hunted. This is the run of someone being hunted. He disappears between the carriages. His friends are shouting, their voices thin with panic. And then a flash, a crack, a body jerking violently on the tracks. The air smells burnt, and somewhere on the empty platform, someone is just standing there, watching. This wasn't a robbery nor a gang fight. He never even touched the boy, but he did not have to. When Aki follows you, fear finishes the job. What kind of man drives someone to choose between leaping onto train tracks or being caught? And if that seemed dark, it was only the beginning. Soon after, a court banned him from touching muscles. Not once, not twice, but so many times the police lost count. One boy said he could still feel Aki's hands on his legs months later. Another refused to testify without witness protection. One boy explained an inverted piggyback in court. Aki just smiled at him. But the most chilling part, that boy on the tracks, he was not the first, and he would not be the last. Because long before headlines and courtrooms ever caught up, his name was already being whispered in schoolyards, locker rooms, parks after dark. A name whispered like a dare, until they realized the bogeyman had a name. Until people realized the bogeyman was real, and he had a name. Across Merseyside his presence didn't need an introduction. He was simply known as Purple Aki, a figure as feared as he was recognizable, 6'5", built like a bodybuilder, and nobody knew what he wanted. His name echoed through schoolyards, half warning, half joke, but always with fear. One parent called him an urban myth in the flesh, but this myth had a pattern, and it always led to the same disturbing habit. He approached teenage boys, asked how much they could lift, then felt their biceps. Sometimes he made them squat. Other times he just watched in chilling silence. Sometimes he grabbed them, claiming it was to admire their strength. He was never convicted of a sexual offense, but it was serious enough for a judge to ban him from touching or even measuring anyone's muscles, a legal order that had never been used before. And then there's the name, Purple Aki, a nickname that carries more than just fear. The name? A cruel reference to his skin color. Locals used to say he was so black he's purple, a comment Arobieke found offensive and degrading. Even the BBC called it out. The name was racially charged. Arobieke himself has repeatedly protested its use in court and in the press, calling it a form of racial demonization. But the name stuck and became inseparable from the legend it fed, because that is how myths survive. Through repetition, through fear, and through the unsettling feeling that the story might be real. In Liverpool, children were warned, don't let Purple Aki catch you. Some parents used his name to keep kids in line. Others overheard their children using it as an insult. I hope you get attacked by Purple Aki. For the kids, it was a joke. For his victims, it was real. Even more surreal was how far the fear travelled. Youths in Glasgow, hundreds of miles away, recalled hearing the same line, Purple Ali's gonna get ya. Few of them even knew who he was. Fewer believed he was real. But then they found out the truth. He had a criminal record stretching back years, and everything changed. He became something else, darker, harder to define. A man trapped between folklore and true crime. A figure made of courtroom files and whispered dares. half man, half bogeyman, and his story was only just beginning. His name spread long before anyone saw his face. In the early 1980s, rumours started circulating among boys in Merseyside. He showed up near train stations, sports fields, anywhere the strong gathered. Tall, looming, silent. Over time, he got bolder. Victims recalled how he'd stop athletes mid-session, ask personal questions, then, without warning, touch their muscles. He didn't hide it. His obsession was disturbingly direct. Most dismissed it, a muscle-obsessed giant, just schoolyard talk, something boys made up to scare their little brothers. Then came the day it stopped being a myth. June the 15th, 1986, Gary Kelly, 16, spent the day at an outdoor pool in New Brighton, just outside Liverpool. He wasn't alone, his friends were there, but when Akinwale Arobieke appeared, fear took over. "Aki's here!" someone shouted. Gary froze, then panicked. This wasn't the first time. He'd already gone to the police. Weeks of stalking, harassment. Some say he even had a restraining order. But this time, Gary ran. He sprinted to the station. New Brighton was a terminus, no trains in motion. Desperate, he climbed into an empty carriage to hide. But Arobieke followed. He paced the platform. One by one he peered into the train cars. What happened next changed everything. Gary jumped onto the tracks, trying to slip away. But he stepped on the third rail. 750 volts surged through him. His body convulsed, then dropped. When help arrived, it was too late, and Arobieke, he was still standing there. Police charged him in connection with Gary's death. In 1987, he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, along with assault and harassment charges tied to multiple boys. The court heard that Gary had been petrified in the days leading up to his death. Prosecutors argued that Arobieke had scared the boy to death, not by attacking him, but simply by existing in his path. The judge agreed. Arobieke, then around 25, received a 2.5-year sentence. But the case was far from over. In 1988, the Court of Appeal overturned his conviction. The judges ruled that standing on a platform and looking into train carriages, even if it caused fear, did not qualify as an unlawful act under manslaughter law. There had been no physical harm, no direct threats. Fear alone, they said, was not a crime. Arobieke walked free after serving about a year behind bars. What came next only deepened the bitterness. In 1989, the Home Office acknowledged the case had racial overtones. Arobieke had been one of the very few black men in the area at the time, and his defence claimed that both the police response and witness testimonies had been shaped by prejudice. The government awarded him £35,000 in compensation. For Gary's family, and for many who had believed the fear was justified, it felt like justice had been undone. A dangerous man, they thought, had escaped through a legal loophole. And yet this reversal only gave the myth more power, because now even the system seemed unsure of what he was. A court had ruled that his presence alone could not be punished, but in the minds of those who had seen him, who had run from him, who had warned others about him, it was already too late to separate myth from threat. The conviction had been overturned, the compensation paid, and for a moment it seemed like the case was closed. But if anyone thought Akinwale Arobieke would disappear after the 1986 tragedy, they were wrong. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, something darker began to take shape. He was no longer simply lingering by swimming pools or train platforms. His attention had grown sharper, more deliberate. Young male athletes, especially rugby league players in the northwest, became the centre of his obsession. By 1994, the warnings were spreading within the sport itself. Teams were no longer hearing rumours, they were collecting complaints. Coaches were hearing the same name from too many terrified players. Then, in early 1997, something unprecedented happened. Police and Super League officials issued a direct warning to all 12 top rugby clubs in the region. They described a 6'5" bodybuilder known locally as Purple Aki and urged teams to be on alert. This was no longer folklore, it was a pattern. Warrington Wolves chairman John Smith did not mince words. "This man's a menace," he said. "Unless something's done soon, somebody's going to get hurt." And behind that warning was a trail of fear that had already taken root. Over at least 3 years, Arobieke had allegedly targeted dozens of rugby players, many still in their teens. Some of the accounts are almost surreal in their intensity. Players' homes were not safe. Doors were banged on late at night. Windows smashed. In one case, a brick was hurled through the bedroom window of a 17-year-old boy who had rejected Arobieke's advances. Other times, it was property damage. Car tyres slashed. Paint stripped from vehicles. At Oldham, 3 club officials discovered their cars had been destroyed with corrosive liquid. Some players received direct threats. One was told a letter bomb would be pushed through his door if he did not comply. Others were warned of physical violence or worse. Face to face, the encounters became more bizarre and more dangerous. One 17-stone forward was physically lifted onto Arobieke's shoulders as he performed squats with the player like a barbell. The victim was too terrified to resist. What unsettled the players most was his unsettling knowledge. Arobieke somehow knew their home addresses, their phone numbers, their training schedules. He appeared outside the locker rooms. He lurked near cars after matches. On one occasion, he slipped into a stadium using a pass that resembled press credentials. By 1997, authorities had identified at least 30 families who had been hounded by his obsessive behaviour. Rugby clubs began instructing players to carry mobile phones at all times and avoid being alone after games. These were elite athletes, strong, confident young men. But even their coaches admitted they were scared. "These lads are young, fit and strong," said John Smith. "You'd think they could look after themselves, but they're all very scared." The mother of one player summed it up bluntly. "He's made our life a misery." Her son lived in constant fear, and police quietly admitted they were tracking similar cases across the region. At the time, the UK had no formal anti-stalking laws in place. The Protection from Harassment Act was still working its way through Parliament, and Arobieke knew the law well enough to stay just outside its reach. He exploited the grey areas, shadowing his victims and intimidating them without ever stepping over the line defined by legislation. When confronted by the press in 1997, he didn't back down. He acknowledged problems with some clubs, but turned the accusation around. Arobieke claimed that players from Oldham had racially abused him and that his actions were appropriate retaliation. "If you were being racially abused," he told the people, "would you leave it at that?" He also made his intentions clear. "I'm a fan of rugby," he said. "I'm not going to stop going to games." And he taunted anyone who dared challenge him. "Nobody's been able to get any evidence against me for anything," he said, adding that if anyone had something to say, they should say it to my face, and he would take the appropriate action. By then, the myth was no longer spreading by rumour alone. It was growing in police memos and tabloid pages. It was whispered at stadium gates, shared in locker rooms, and passed between parents like a warning. Even years later, one online commenter would ask, "Surely every town has a local weirdo. How did this guy's legend spread beyond Merseyside in a pre-internet age? But it had. By the late 1990s, the story of Purple Aki had shifted from a whispered warning to a growing crisis, and the system that had once failed to stop him was about to try again. It had taken nearly 2 decades, dozens of warnings, countless encounters, but finally, in the early 2000s, the weight of it all caught up with him. In November 2001, Akinwale Arobieke was charged with an astonishing 50 counts of indecent assault and harassment involving 14 teenage boys. The charges spanned 5 years, incidents that stretched from 1995 to 2000. Still, even with the scale of the case laid out in court, Arobieke denied everything. He pleaded not guilty. But the testimonies did not stop coming, and as the investigation deepened, the image became clearer of a man who had stalked, followed, and fixated on boys with a level of persistence that defied reason. In April 2003, the pressure broke. Arobieke changed his plea. At Preston Crown Court, he admitted to 15 counts of harassment and 1 count of witness intimidation. The more serious assault charges were left on file, unpursued but never forgotten. 8 months later, the sentence came down. Judge Edward Slinger described Arobieke as a danger to young men, with a pattern of behaviour that was both strange and obsessive. He handed him down a 6-year prison sentence. But the court did not stop there. Arobieke was also issued an indefinite restraining order, prohibiting him from contacting the victims, their families, or even being near their homes. The order wasn't symbolic. It was a boundary drawn in desperation, an attempt to contain something that had gone unchecked for too long. The scope of the investigation revealed just how far the damage had spread. 123 people were interviewed by police during the inquiry. Behind that number were lives disrupted, families haunted, and teenagers pushed into silence by fear. One couple from St Helens spoke anonymously after the verdict. Their son had been one of Arobieke's primary targets. They remembered the years of torment. Many young lads in the town went through a lot of pain and suffering at the hands of this man, they said. But they don't have to fear Purple Aki anymore. He's not above the law, as he would have had them believe. Their son's testimony had helped secure the conviction, but it came at a cost. So frightened was he that he had to be placed under witness protection. Panic alarms were installed in the family home, CCTV cameras mounted, and still they lived on edge. For 3 years he haunted the boys every step. He would show up wherever the teenager went. He somehow knew details about the boys' family, when they were home, where they worked. He cornered the teenager in remote places, touching his legs and arms. The mother remembered the moment it all broke, when her son returned home, not walking, but on his knees and physically trembling. That was when they realized it had to stop. Deputy Superintendent Mike Dale knew exactly what they were dealing with. Over the years, Akinwale Arobieke has been persistent in his pursuit and harassment of a number of young men, said Detective Superintendent Mike Dale. It's to the credit of the witnesses who, despite their fears, remained steadfast and determined to see justice done, to stop him from making other people's lives a misery. By 2003, the reign of Purple Aki had for the first time been halted, and yet there was a reason people still whispered his name. Because this was not the beginning of his sentence. It was after he had already served 30 months for threats to kill, involving another victim entirely. When Arobieke walked free in 2006, fear returned with him. Though never convicted of a sex crime, police imposed a rare order banning him from touching muscles, because unless he was behind bars, he didn't stop. They called it the muscle-touching ban. On October the 26th, 2006, a magistrate approved the order. Under its terms, Arobieke was forbidden from touching, feeling, or measuring the muscles of any person, and even from asking anyone to perform squats or exercises in public. He was banned from approaching males under 18 and even barred from entire towns, St Helens, Warrington and Widnes, unless he had explicit police permission. Gyms, schools, sports clubs, off limits. This was no ordinary restraining order. It was in every sense a legal muzzle, the aim to strangle the myth before it could breathe again. But Arobieke didn't stay silent for long. He challenged the ban in court, calling it draconian. His defence pointed out that harassment, not sexual assault, was his conviction, and in February 2007 he won. Liverpool Crown Court judges overturned the SOPO, ruling it disproportionate. They said there was no clear evidence that his behaviour had caused serious psychological harm and no proof that it was sexually motivated. For a brief moment, Arobieke had slipped the leash, but not for long. Merseyside police appealed the ruling. Another similar order from a different jurisdiction remained active, and within months they succeeded in reinstating the SOPO. By mid-2007, the muscle-touching ban was back, and this time it was indefinite. But Arobieke didn't wait long to break it. Just 6 or 7 months after his release, he was back at it. On May the 24th, 2007, at the St George's Shopping Centre in Preston, he approached a young man. He made a comment about the man's biceps, then touched his arms without permission. Police arrested Arobieke at his Toxteth home. The case went to court, and investigators revealed something deeply chilling. He had kept what amounted to a stalker's manual, a notebook filled with victims' phone numbers, body measurements, family information, even a father's car license plate. One method described in court stunned the room. Arobieke reportedly became aroused by forcing victims into inverted piggybacks, a disturbing maneuver that left him with his chin near a boy's lower back, his crotch pressed against their neck, all while squeezing their quadriceps. These details painted a picture that the legal system had long struggled to capture. In 2008, Arobieke issued a public apology in court. "I'm sorry for touching men's muscles. I know it was wrong," he admitted. He called himself infamous, notorious, everything from a bogeyman to whatever. But apologies didn't halt prosecution. In April 2009, Liverpool Crown Court convicted him again for another SOPO breach involving a 17-year-old in Birkenhead. This time, the teen testified from behind a screen. He had been approached, asked how much he could bench, and then realized this was Purple Aki. The boy fled in fear. Later, he said the encounter made him feel physically sick. The judge noted that Arobieke's terrifying reputation preceded him. This, after all, was his 72nd recorded offence since 1980. The court gave him 18 months, and as always, it didn't last. In June 2010, fresh out of prison and supposedly under supervision, Arobieke headed to Llandudno in North Wales. There he approached a 16-year-old boy and groped his calves and thighs. It was a clear breach of the SOPO. This time, Mould Crown Court called him what many had long suspected, a sexual predator. He was sentenced to 2.5 more years in prison. Again, Arobieke claimed innocence. He said he was set up. But the pattern told its own story. Even while locked up, rumours about him raged. In 2012, police had to publicly refute online rumours that Arobieke had died. Twitter buzzed with claims that Purple Aki was gone. Merseyside police clarified, no, he was alive and still incarcerated. His reputation had become mythic. Even his own solicitor at one point referred to him as the bogeyman, known across the region as Purple Aki. He was released again in June 2012 and almost immediately found himself in yet another legal battle. But this time, Arobieke was the accuser. In August 2012, he attended a bodybuilding expo in Manchester. Off-duty Detective Inspector Lewis Hughes recognised him and called the police, saying there's a famous paedophile here accosting people in the toilets. Arobieke was arrested, but there was no proof he had harassed anyone. After 6 weeks in custody, the charges were dropped. Hughes' comment, it turned out, had been unacceptable and unprofessional. Arobieke used the ruling to escalate his defence. He called it a witch hunt. In August 2013, he went to trial again for alleged SOPO breaches in Manchester, St. Peter's Square, Trafford and Bolton. He was acquitted of all charges. He claimed police were chasing him based on his name alone. He cited cases where officers sought out potential victims rather than waiting for complaints. One charge accusing him of harassing D.I. Hughes collapsed entirely when the officer's behaviour came under scrutiny. In 2014, Greater Manchester's police's internal investigation upheld some of Arobieke's complaints. One officer had acted overly confrontational. Another failed to process a grievance properly. It seemed at least in part that his fears weren't entirely unfounded. But the pattern hadn't ended either. In October 2013, Arobieke was on a train from Manchester to Colwyn Bay. He struck up a conversation with the college student, then asked to touch and measure the student's muscles. It was everything the SOPO had been designed to stop. In 2015, he stood trial again. He represented himself. He railed against the press, the nickname, the injustice. He reminded the court that the Press Complaints Commission had warned against using Purple Aki, as it could be racially loaded. But the jury convicted him. He received another 16-month sentence, and this time something shifted, because this would become one of the last times Akinwale Arobieke was brought to court over his muscle obsession. After nearly 3 decades of cycling between prison and alleged persecution, the system and the man himself were approaching a breaking point. The muscle ban era of Purple Aki was nearing its end, but not his story. In 2016, Akinwale Arobieke, now in his mid-50s, convinced a judge to lift the long-standing muscle-touching ban. The court, citing a lack of recent harm and re-evaluating his behaviour as non-sexual, granted him a second chance. Arobieke promised reform, saying he'd conduct himself properly moving forward. But the myth wasn't ready to die. That same year, the BBC released a documentary titled The Man Who Squeezes Muscles, reigniting public curiosity and controversy. Arobieke accused the BBC of inciting racial hatred, feeling villainized by the media yet again. The show blurred the lines further between predator and pariah, bogeyman and misunderstood man. Despite his legal freedom, the legend of Purple Aki continued to haunt him. In 2017, a Manchester restaurant named a burger after him. Public backlash was swift. In 2021, he was filmed being attacked with fireworks by teenagers on the street, revealing a disturbing role reversal. The feared had become the hunted. Online, his name remained in folklore. On Reddit, in urban legend threads, his story lived on as both meme and menace. In 2022, Arobieke won a civil settlement from Greater Manchester Police alleging years of malicious prosecution. The police paid, not because they admitted guilt, but perhaps because they saw the shadow they'd helped create. He began as a local warning, whispered on playgrounds, a towering figure with a sinister obsession. Over decades, courts tried to contain him, the media tried to define him, and the public turned him into a myth. But myths don't die, they mutate. So, who is Purple Aki now? A predator turned pariah? A man haunted by his own legend? Or something else entirely? Maybe the most chilling part of this story is that nobody knows where the truth ends and the nightmare begins.